So guys, welcome to the second workshop on S3M2. We specifically will concentrate around the processes in AppSec program, how we evolve and accelerate them in order to achieve a higher maturity of our AppSec programs. Hopefully you've already are familiar, heard a little bit yesterday and today about the S3M2. So just let me recap. Scalable Software Security S3, Maturity Model M2. So for the people who are not well aware, we'll give a short introduction and overview of the S3M2 today. And then I will spend a little bit of time talking about the specific challenges around the process of the software security maturity. And then Aruneesh will talk about the dimensions and the attributes of S3M2 related to the process side. Talking about security controls in the software development that are related to the processes are very important for many different reasons. But my call to action to you today, guys, with this session is, first of all, share your thoughts, your opinions within the chat. Be an active participant. We will have polls throughout the session, so please participate in them. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you feel, what is important to you, what are your pain points. And then in the end, we're going to have a couple of minutes in the Q&A session to discuss those results. And throughout the session, we'll try to answer some of the questions that you may have. The second call to action from me personally is, like every emerging maturity model that we present to you today, let's not stop today with this workshop and with this conference. Let's take it out. Let's take it to your companies. Let's take it to the community. That reminds me that in the end of the day today, we have a special presentation about the power of the community, the power of this collective knowledge, especially in the cybersecurity area and AppSec more specifically. So please stay tuned for this session again. But again, let's communicate and let's take this one home with us for further, like a conversation opener. That said, we'll start with S3M2, talking a little bit about the maturity level. So the increase of the maturity level starting from reactive, maybe limited visibility, maybe we don't have the right tools, maybe we don't have visibility and we don't have any commitment to our AppSec programs. And so with the process of maturity, we move to this more proactive, managed, ending up with optimized, dynamic way, with threat models, with complete visibility, with data-driven decisions and company commitment to the AppSec program. So this is the path that we are going to take today. As a summary slide, this is the process side, but one of the best things about S3M2 is that we are looking at the maturity, AppSec maturity, in terms of the three main dimensions: people, process, and technologies. And this is what Aruneesh will present to you specifically more about the process. So I try to summarize for you the challenges of the software security related to the process. And as you see on this slide, we have a list of 6 items, but if you take a look at them: reliable and consistent asset inventory, risk-based prioritization, security depth, proper governance, reporting metrics, consistent remediation workflows. It's obvious that all of them are interconnected, highly interconnected and interdependent. So if we have to kind of have lines, there will be lines everywhere going in between all of those 6 items on this slide. And that's probably true, because how you're going to be able to make a risk-based prioritization or to understand and externalize your security depth if you don't have a proper inventory? How you can go to your boss and ask for money for your application security program or just support if we don't have proper metrics? How can we ensure consistent remediation flows if we don't have metrics and inventory, and then we don't instantiate in our company this risk-based prioritization approach? So all of those are really connected. And this connection comes in one other very important point: the developer experience. So guilty. For quite a long time, the security has been seen as a slowdown, as a stick in the wheel for the application development, and especially with the agile process. So when we were working in the waterfall, we had a time designated for security. And when we moved to the agile, this time designated to security is not always present. We don't always have our JIRA items or backlog items that are equally prioritized as some of the features that we need to deliver. And this is a problem because security today is a competitive edge. It's part of the user experience. It's part of our user communications and user expectations. It's a competitive edge, really. So I've had conversations with developers coming and saying, whoa, you're talking about productivity, but it takes me 2 hours to run my 𝗪, and then I have to go to their console, and 90% of the vulnerability I see there are false positive, so I have to go back to my environment, try to fix something, go this path again. So the developer experience is something extremely important when we talk about the application security maturity, and more specifically to the process. So with the next slides, let's go and delve a little bit into more details of each one of those items and compare it to each other. Obviously, that lack of incomplete of asset tracking systems and visibility, this lack of visibility of the assets that we need to protect is obviously a low maturity level. Now, the maturity level is hard to achieve sometimes because our environments are quite complex. We have shadow IT, unauthorized assets. We have dynamic distributed environments. We have cloud. We have third party. We have mainframe, old applications. And in many cases, we are lacking also automation in this process of inventory. I'll give you 2 examples. I was consulting with a company to address the log4j vulnerability. And really, the company was really good. It took them less than a week to fix everything what they were supposed to address. But guess how much time it took them to actually discover what they need to fix? This was like over 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. Sounds familiar? Another issue related to the automation and, again, the controls that we have about cloud adoption. Initially, this issue came as a financial problem. So the finance people were complaining, saying, hey, we have a huge cloud bills and we have all these resources. We don't know who they belong to. Who do I need to go after for this cost? But after that, immediately, this turns to be a security problem. Who is going to secure? Who's responsible? Can I just go and patch it? Or maybe I will break the application if I do that. So with this, we can move to the risk-based prioritization. Lack of risk-based prioritization approach into the app security is, again, at the lower side of the maturity level, just because it's absolutely critical for us to have a good understanding of our current risks. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that anybody's going to say we have enough resources, we can go and start addressing everything at the same time. So if we need to have proper addressing of all the vulnerabilities, consistent workflows for remediations, we need to have and we need to adopt this risk-based approach. We do understand that the risk assessments are complex. If we don't have proper metrics that can complicate our life, again, on the lower maturity side. If we don't have proper visibility, it will be hard to incorporate and to keep with the constantly evolving threats, it's not easy. So these are all complications. But again, this is one of the items that we should be able to address in order for us to be more mature. Similarly, talking about security depth, or always view the security depth as part of the technical depth. I don't believe that we have a company that is not able of to eliminate completely their technical debt. So there's always going to be technical debt and security debt. The question is, we need to address it, and we need to be able to plan for it, to have a plan in place. In many cases, this results in a reactive versus proactive approach, and this is the big difference between low to a higher maturity. And in many cases, move to cloud or legacy systems that actually represents problem with the technical and the security debt. And I'll give you one example. I was working with a company. They decided to move their password length to 16 digits. Great, right? But 4 of their systems were only allowing them to passwords up until 8 characters. Here is a legacy system problem, right? So with the next slide, I had a real problem how to structure it, to put the reporting and metrics on the left side and the governance on the right, or leave it the way I have it today. Just because they're so interconnected and so interrelated. Obviously, we would like for all of our application security programs to have buy-in, to have commitment, to have support at all levels with all stakeholders. But sometimes, we have insufficient policies. We have standards that are not translated to proper procedures. And for the developers, it's hard to really figure out how these things need to be prioritized and implemented. For a low maturity level, we also have limited visibility and metrics into the state of the security across the application and system. And in the end, we all try to drive this culture of accountability, responsibility, and in the end, some enforcement towards our compliant. For all of this, we need to have proper metrics and standardized metrics. We don't want to report on thousands of metrics. We want to select the ones that are more applicable to our own environments. We may not need to be at 4 or 5 maturity level. We may decide to stay at 3 if this is sufficient to our business. And we would like this visibility above from the reporting metrics that we can use for risk-based addressing of text of the software and technical debt and proper governance. And with that, I will transition to Aruneesh to present the process S3M2.
Thank you so much, Maria, for laying the foundation and the necessary building blocks. So as you might have heard in the previous workshop itself, which is more focused on the people, the intent for our proposed model is enabling organization to go through this particular journey, do an assessment where those respective organizations are in their maturity level and the steps they can actually take to go from level 1 to level 2 or level 3 to level 4, for example, right? So, and just to do a recap, I mean, like the 4 or the 5 level that we spoke about within our proposed model. One is at a level where it's pretty much everything is ad hoc, right? We are very reactive. Everything is sort of like a snowflake. There is no process established, and everything is like you're trying to figure out every time there is an issue what needs to be done, right? So there is not enough visibility into the debt, for example, right? So, and then comes like the next maturity level where you're slightly proactive. You have like some sort of like a forethought of what needs to be done, the consistency that it's needed. And once you are at that particular level where there is a forethought and expectation, right? You move into the third stage, which is more on the managed, where everything is kind of under control. You are kind of connecting all the dots together. And beyond managed, you go into optimize and you go to a dynamic state, right? And given the issue that have been foreseen or seen in the last maybe like 5 to 7 years itself, right? I would expect most of the organization are at a level 2 or maybe a level 3 at this point in time. So let's actually go through a leveled approach, look at different dimensions that we have, and also some of the attributes and what do we expect in those respective levels, right? So if we talk from a governance perspective, right? Once you are at a reactive level, there isn't a forethought about the governance and the workflow that are needed within the organization. There is no forethought of proactive remediation, what needs to be done if something happens, right? When log4j, as Maria was talking about maybe like a few minutes earlier, many of the organizations were kind of in that boat trying to figure out, what is my inventory? What do I need to do in terms of remediation? Some organization definitely had some high level of maturity, but it was totally reactive. You're like fighting fires every single time. Going to the second dimension, which we talk about from asset inventory and categorization perspective, right? So there isn't like a inventory that organization have. There might be some bit of inventory that is maintained in maybe a text file or Excel file, but it's not like an automated process where you actually have a 100% accurate view of the world, right? What are your assets? What are your application? What are your APIs which are being exposed? And if application is onboarded or is getting deprecated, that list can easily go out of whack and it's not going to be current, right? Risk-based prioritization is definitely not something that you would think about when you're in a reactive mode. Remediation is sort of like a snowflake, right? Every time a new thing comes, you're trying to figure out what needs to be done. You're kind of bringing in the necessary people into those conversations, whether it's your developers or your support folks into the mix or your SOC team. Definitely don't have like much visibility into your security debt. And last but not the least, when we talk about reporting and metrics, you don't have like a cool like aggregation of information into like some sort of a data lake where you can actually ingest and then project out what are my issues. Am I breaching some of my SLAs? What is my MTTR? What is my MTD itself, right? So you don't have like a visibility into these particular dimensions itself. So if you go to the level 2, which I would think like most, 1 second. So from a level 2, or which we call it like as a proactive level, right? So you are actually do like some pre-planning what needs to happen. It's on the governance level, or it's building up your inventory, or doing some prioritization, right? So there is like some bit of planning that has already gone in. Like governance, we can take a small example, right? Many companies would probably look at investing in some sort of attack surface management, anything which is being exposed externally. And what do we do after a new thing is being found, right? Like, how does that correlate to like from a prioritization or remediation? So it's sort of like interconnected in some sorts. So what you have, governance needs to actually percolate within your inventory, the categorization. It needs to actually touch upon your prioritization strategy. You need to look at what your remediation strategy should be, and how do you capture all that information into a security debt. So when you talk about the asset inventory and categorization, you're really focusing on building some sort of a realistic asset inventory, but it might be partial. It might be done both from automated fashion and some bit of manual intervention. And you can take an assumption that you might not have 100% view of your asset inventory, but definitely it's definitely you're arriving towards that one. And the effort definitely needs to continue towards automating these gaps, which are like probably getting done using some manual workflows. Once we actually talk about the managed, you would see like how the automation fits into this particular picture. From a risk-based prioritization at this particular level, we find that prioritization is possibly or likely being done using the scanning solutions. If you're doing any SAST or DAST scanning, or you're doing a SCA scanning, the prioritization is getting done using the scanning solutions, not doing holistically to bring everything together and provide like a business context of looking at where your assets are sitting. So prioritization is definitely which might be siloed at this particular stage. From a remediation perspective, you're definitely looking at, okay, what are my SLAs? What are the SLAs that I need to abide by, whether it's within a regulated industry like banking, finance, or insurance, or healthcare. You are definitely strategizing remediation activities. It may not be strictly enforced at this point in time, but definitely there is visibility into that one. And it's not universally applied. So you might have like workflows which are like specific to SAST and DAST, which may not fit very well or might not be coherent in terms of from a open source SCA perspective. At this particular level, you're definitely looking at the security debt, like how do you actually ingest all the security and technical debt into the same workflow. But the much needed focus may not still exist at this point in time, right? So you definitely have visibility, but the focus that is needed at this particular dimension may not be there at just yet. And from a reporting perspective, just like your remediation and security debt, it's probably getting done on an ad hoc basis. It may not be ideal, but it's definitely arriving or driving the organization towards like a level of standardization and maturity. And given it's not like fully automated, it's usually prone to human error. Maybe like you're ingesting or introducing a new field or something. So you might find the reporting might not be very accurate, right? But it underlines the need for increased automation across all the 5 or 6 dimensions that we spoke about. Moving on to the next stage itself, we call it as a managed state. It's a level 3. So if you look through all the definitions for these particular things or the attributes around this, you see like there is increased amount of automation that's being introduced at each and every level, right? So asset inventory automation is definitely is increasing at this particular level. Automation may not be fully implemented, but there is emphasis on like having a good amount of portfolio visibility, what you have, the assets that you have, what are those assets connected to, which business unit they're connected to, whether it's external facing, internal facing, all that visibility is being built into that particular platform. Same thing for the prioritization. Prioritization would probably include at this stage, what is my application business context? Is it sitting in my DMZ? Is it sitting behind the firewall? Is it touching any PII data? Like what kind of data it's actually touching. Even from a remediation standpoint, there is some formalized strategy for remediation, which are being carried out with a little bit of rigor and policy compliance, right? So we talked about being in a regulated industry itself. So remediation definitely needs to have some sort of formalized strategy that you can actually prove to the auditors that you have like a strategy within your organization and you're like doing some of those things that you have in your policy documentation. From a security debt at this particular level, we would say like the visibility is absolute. All the new debt is managed and is under control, also known as like stop the bleeding, right? So you're looking at on net new issues that are coming into your platform, you have like a strong control, right? You might be able to actually say, okay, my older issues are also getting remediated or have visibility into that one. But definitely for any new stuff, like there is a good amount of visibility. There is like workflows established. Whenever a new thing happens, we are quick to action within our organization. And the same thing actually goes into the reports and metrics. The consolidation of reporting for security portion on a regular basis, that becomes like a standardized activity at this point in time. You're definitely tracking and reporting on metrics like MTTR, like mean time to resolution, or MTTD, mean time to detection itself. So you're kind of looking at all those important metrics into the mix, and also like reporting on my risk exposure. And also from a SLA compliance, right? Am I breaching any of my SLAs around like critical or high or medium severity issues within my organization? And even from a workflow or a governance aspect itself, right? So there is like governance already established. SLAs are clearly defined and accepted within your organization. Risk methodologies are clearly defined. You're definitely relying more and more on the automation tools within your organization, which kind of like ties all these pieces together. And you have like almost like a real-time visibility of what your exposures really are. And the next two levels talks about, okay, so you have achieved like full control about your security debt. You have like a strategy on remediation and governance. This takes a step forward, right? It talks about concepts around like policy as code. I mean, like if you have like a policy around SLA breaches and stuff, right? Can I put like a policy around that one where anytime there is a breach of SLA happening, right? Somebody within the organization gets communicated, whether it's through an email or through a Slack channel or a ServiceNow ticket gets created automatically. So that's the level of maturity that you would observe at this particular level. The same thing for the asset inventory. You want to come to a level where, let's say, any new application that is getting onboarded, the automation around onboarding to ensure the integration for your all scanning solutions, for all the application scanning solution is automagical at this particular stage. So there is no manual intervention that is required. From a remediation perspective, the SLA compliance becomes very, very important. And from a security debt perspective, there is emphasis on like having absolute 100% visibility into my security debt. And at this particular stage, you would expect that debt is significantly getting reduced and it's managed. And also like any new issues that are coming in, I mean, like there's like tightly under control. And from a reporting and metrics, before this particular stage, you would expect that everything is being reported or the PDF reports or something else is being given to you as an end consumer, right? At this particular stage that we would expect based on the maturity of our organization, it's sort of like on demand or self-service, right? So if I'm like a CISO or I'm like somebody in my technical organization, I would have like a portal that I can go and like get visibility into what my exposures are, which SLAs I'm breaching. And it's basically, you don't have to depend on others. You can actually go to a specific portal within your organization and get all the information that you desire for fulfilling your function or your responsibility. And going to the last one, which is, it may be a pipe dream for most of the organization, but you can consider this as like a nirvana state where you want to aim towards, right? And then depending on the size of the organization or the maturity or whether you sit in a regulated industry, you may or may not be even looking at going into a dynamic, because once you actually achieve level 5, the cost definitely increases. The effort around automation definitely goes up quite drastically. And there are investments that are required in different levels, right? Like one of the examples that we can think about is from a governance aspect. You're focusing on maybe establishing like an open source program office, for example, right? Which actually defines policy for the continued use of open source libraries that you're bringing in. Maybe you can have a focus on invest and divest list within your organization. Let's say you're deprecating a messaging library going from A to B. You need to have like controls around this one. So definitely your processes definitely go up. Your investments definitely need to go up. But the advantages on this one is, if you take any of these dimensions, right, whether it's asset inventory, your 100% correlation with the asset inventory systems of record and business functions, right? So you have like complete visibility what's happening. Your asset inventory is completely reliable and up to date. From a risk-based prioritization, you are bringing in aspects like threat modeling, which further drives your prioritization effectively. And especially this is compounded because the increased usage of cloud and containerized workload, which are like short-lived. From a remediation and security debt perspective, there is visibility into what you have. It's well understood across the board. And definitely there is organization acceptance of prioritization of debt reduction as part of your backlog. And also at this particular level, if you talk about reporting and metrics itself, you're really looking at ROI analysis for the overall security programs that you have, whether it's for your application tooling, scanning solutions, your application security champion program that you might have stood up in your organization. And you're really focusing on operationalizing tool selection and optimization. and given like the world that we live in, there is already emphasis on like tool consolidation. No organization wants to stand up and maintain like 50 different security solutions within an organization, right? So you're kind of looking at what is my ROI for my investments, and do I need to actually fine tune my investments, right? Maybe going from like 3 scanning solutions to maybe a 1, for example, right? And those are like definitely around driven through actionable results, right? Which is basically enabling decision making into the mix. So next slide, I realize the font might be a little slow because there is a lot of information that needs to be captured in this particular slide. But at this point in time, we want to actually roll out a set of polling questions. We can probably allocate maybe 5 minutes for everyone to actually review from your respective organization perspective. Where do you think you are in a level of maturity? Are you at a level 1 in governance, or a level 3, or from a security debt? Like, where do you stand at this point in time? While everybody is actually going through the polls itself, just as a reminder, there is a section where you can actually post your questions. We'll try to actually take as many questions as possible in the minutes left after the poll is done. So definitely take advantage of that one. And again, like, this might not be the only time that we're going to have this particular workshop. So we encourage everyone to actually look at what's happening in the Purple Book S3M2 itself, and stay tuned on that one.
We will also have workshops after this conference closes today. We are going to have workshops scheduled. So please check the location near you or virtual, and please join us. Consider joining us with the goal of higher maturity model.
So I think we can actually proceed further in the spirit of time. We only have 17 minutes left, and we have like some open questions. So I'll actually go through some of the poll results itself, right? Where do organizations really sit? So based on the 12 responses that we have so far, from an asset inventory perspective, we see many of the organizations are at a managed state, which is very, very promising. Only a subset of responses which qualify themselves as being reactive, but majority of the organizations are either at a proactive state or managed. And one of the responses also talk about that organization being an optimized state. So kudos to anyone who's at the level 3 or a level 4, which is very, very promising. From a risk-based prioritization perspective, it is not unexpected. Like almost like 70% of the responses came towards being at a level 2, which is more on the proactive, and 31% talk about being at a managed state, right, where you have like things under control. And looking at the maturity perspective from a security debt perspective, again, it's not very surprising that more than 30% are at a managed state. There are a few which talked about their organization being very reactive, but almost like 46-47% are at a proactive stage at this point in time. From a remediation perspective, almost, which is very, very promising and encouraging itself, almost like 50% of the organization say they're, from a remediation perspective, they are at level 3, which means that they're managing it quite well. Almost like 38% are at a proactive stage. And looking at from a reporting perspective, definitely, there is 1 or 2 responses which talk about the organization being at an optimized level, where they have like a high level of maturity in that definitely you don't expect many organizations to be at a level 5, but majority of the responses say that they're anywhere from a level 2 to a level 4 at this point in time, right? And from a governance perspective, almost like 50% of the responses came towards saying they're operating at a managed level, which is again very encouraging and promising. 45% are towards like a proactive stage, which is again very promising. And again, like there is one particular response which talks about being at a level 4 at this stage. And one of the questions was talking about, do you think the model is adequate to measure the maturity of process-related factors in software security? Like 100% of the responses which say that it definitely is. The response was yes. So which gives us confidence that we are on the right journey. There is like approval from most of the folks on the workshop that we are definitely doing something right in this. And the last question was, what attributes should be added to the model that you believe are currently missing? Not seen any response on that. There's only one response, none, which is very encouraging. And again, like similar to what Maria had said, like we're going to have like continued workshop in respective areas in different parts of US itself and maybe in other regions also. So we encourage everybody to take advantage of that and actually share your thoughts into this as we mature the model. Let's see, we have, Maria, do you want to cover this one?
Sure. I was trying to provide some of the answers in the chat. Thank you very much for your questions, guys. Keep coming. The discussion is what really brings the most value. So to sum up our discussion today, and again, let's keep talking, but we kind of wanted to give you a couple of ideas where to go from here. Obviously, from the polls, we have a bunch of pretty AppSec aware engineers on the call, and we should try to spread the goodness around. So a couple of ideas for continuing this conversation. In short term, it seems that it will be beneficial if we review the components of the maturity model, get yourself familiarized with S3M2, and see what additionally we may need to add to it, how we can mature our own maturity model. We also thought that assessment of where you stand today to understand, according to the industry best practices, it seems that you guys have a pretty good awareness, which is very encouraging, as Aruneesh mentioned. And then what else can we measure? How can we measure exactly where we stand? How do we stand? How do we align toward this business needs and our business requirements? How can we make AppSec security part of our satisfaction for the user requirements and expectations? And this kind of aligns also with the long term, to align the AppSec maturity program with the business objectives of the organization, communicate throughout the organization. The business stakeholders, they definitely need to understand any risk that our applications may pose to the company, not just the compliance or the security or the IT people. And also the business users and the compliance and this collaboration throughout the organization will help you to determine this long-term vision and goals for your AppSec program. Will help you also to fund it, to create common programs like, for example, Security Champions program, which is across the organization. And all of this will also help you to prioritize the investments that you need, prioritize the initiatives that you may have in your roadmap, and to proceed to implementation and continuously increasing the maturity of your AppSec programs. With that, thank you very much for joining the session, and let's see what other questions we may want to answer verbally in the next about 10 minutes that are left. I did answer a question, I think, from Lynn. in terms of the common challenges. Some of them I already listed in the deck, but really what I wanted to comment to Lynn is the best way to address all of those challenges in bunch or one by one is to put this glasses of the holistic approach, to see everything through the holistic approach, where we stand. For example, lack of awareness and understanding about the AppSec program. Okay, do we have proper metrics that we can raise? Do we have a proper approach to address remediation? Do we have integration into SDLC? Do we have this shift left? Do we start collecting security requirements from the get-go and then continuously managing those requirements equally to product features? We all have resource constraints. Do we have a creative way to help our developers? And I'll give you one example. We had one application that had huge amount of cross-site scriptings and SQL injections. It was a very old code. Some of the modules of this application, again, big monolith, think about it. We didn't even have developers who had any knowledge about this code. And when we scanned it originally, we were really surprised to see such a high number of vulnerabilities. And what we decided to do is, because we were really not capable of going and addressing this vulnerability, especially in shorter time, we decided to put this application behind the web application firewall. Well, it's not going to resolve the vulnerabilities, but it will give a little bit size of protection. So this mitigation thinking, risk-balanced approach as part of the holistic view is also very important. Another advice that I give constantly to all of my friends and colleagues is manage your third-party providers like you'd like to manage your own application security program. Have the same requirements for them. Ask them, hey, do you implement the data privacy from get-go? How do you safeguard data? How do you remediate the vulnerabilities? Do you have vulnerabilities in your code? What kind of a SOC certification maybe you have? So all of those requirements should stay, and it should be applicable to our third-party providers as well. And in terms of this sustaining of this continuous improvement, hopefully, Lynn, this address your question. If not, you can answer this in our questions. Aruneesh, a question for you on the remediation level 4. Remediation for level 4, can you please elaborate on the integration with threat intel feeds?
Yeah, from a remediation, definitely, once your starting point is, say, 1,000 different issues that you have to deal with, right? So you actually have to bring in integration with some sort of threat intel, whether it's open source or commercial one, to provide like some sort of a context, what's happening, what exactly your exposure really is, and what's the chatter that's happening on the dark web or Reddit or other channels, right? So you definitely need some sort of integration on that level. And with my understanding of some of the vendors, some of them definitely have like a rich set of integration with threat intel from within the platform. But sometimes you want to enrich that data with other commercial vendors like Recorded Future and other players in that segment. So that definitely will make your decision making much more seamless and more contextual.
And also, in terms of remediation and just prioritization that comes by threat intel that we share across companies or with open source, I think it's very important, and a lot of companies leave this one on the back burner sometimes, the prioritization of review of all of those shares. And this is very important because think about it this way. In the past, we've seen vulnerabilities reported, and maybe 6, 12, 18, 24 months, there was no exploitation of those vulnerabilities. Think about how this is changing today. Within 2 weeks of the announcement of the vulnerabilities, we already have exploits. Or we have exploits that are actually revealing that we have such and such vulnerability. So our time to react to those is shortening a lot, which puts additional pressure on us as AppSec teams. right? So the intel sharing, I think, is critical for us today, but also how we react and how our readiness, our preparedness to react and to remediate, which will depend on all of these other items that we said, the risk-based approach, the remediation, the mitigation, this continuously improvement strategy, having a plan, having a roadmap. All of this, I think, comes to play together here. There was another good question about the data, and let me find it so I can read it specifically. Was asking if the data should be considered as into the asset tracking. And so data flows are definitely, and integrations are definitely something that we need to track and to be accountable for. And I will give you an example. A big portion of what we do today with having an API endpoints to provide our data, having microservices that are tossing our data around. So just the different way our different architectures have changed the ways we think about data security and data privacy to be built from the beginning. So being conscious about how this data is safeguarded, how it's protected, how this data actually flows end-to-end throughout our organization is very important. The other thing, talking about data also, is think about in terms of data classification. The data, if we don't have proper data classification, how would we know, what data needs to be protected, how our applications need to handle this data in terms of in-flight data and at-use data and data sharing? Does it need to be encrypted, or maybe the tokenization is required, or maybe data masking is required? Do we need maybe homomorphic encryption? So all of those things are part of the application security, which kind of is a good thing, because it's a part of our holistic approach. I don't see any more questions.
I saw a couple of questions around looking at where they can find the deck and more information. Definitely, there are two resources that we can rely upon. In the handout section towards the top right corner, you'll see like a handout section where you can download all the material for all the workshops that have been conducted. And also there is a link called www.thepurplebook.club/S3M2. So you can actually refer to that particular page as well for further information as we mature the model.
I saw another question about the for organizations going budgeting for this maturity. What are the best techniques? I think yesterday we had a very good session that was continuation from the discussion that we had last year on how to build a successful budget for our AppSec program. So definitely refer to this session, to the recording of this session. One thing that is important for us is to be in the know-how. We need to always base our asks on the data. So if you don't have good reporting and good metrics that you can bring to your boss and say, hey, this is where we stand today. So having this reporting and metrics is very important. The second thing is also this risk-based approach that we discussed. Okay, this is where we are today. This is how much risk we are going to incur. And this is how much money I need. You can obviously state, hey, I don't have any tools, or I have tools that do not allow me to have a proper visibility throughout our organization of my AppSec maturity program. So I think that starting with cultural change, again, the holistic approach, the risk-based prioritization, proper mitigation techniques and methods, and then having the proper metrics for raising the awareness and building the governance, this is the best path to go. And with that, we have about 40 seconds left. So again, thank you very much for the great questions. Thank you for attending. And please, let's not stop. Let's take the conversation out into the community.